What's going on, guys? This is Nick from Philo again. I thought it'd be fun to do another tutorial kind of song walkthrough today. The last one we did, the first one we ever made actually, was a remix that we did for Wheat Thin, and people seem to really get a lot out of that. We got a lot of good feedback, positive feedback on that, so I figured I'd do another one today. This song is a remix that we made of a song called Homeless by Yoe Mase. It was actually a Splice remix contest, but we missed the deadline, so we just released it on our own anyways. But if you haven't heard this, you can go over to our SoundCloud page. It's soundcloud.com/PhiloMusic, all one word. That's Philo. And also, if you haven't heard it, I'll give you a little sample right here of what it sounds like. I'll start with just like in the middle of the verse and then just play to the first drop. So if you've heard this, you could skip ahead in a minute or so.
Feels like I read your letters.
Actually, hold up one second. Let me get the master on.
Feels like I read your letters. Pray to myself, I'll reverse the problems. You can sit back and relax on solve. But I won't burn out on my hands, I'm kneeling. I would take control of all these feels I'm feeling. Let me be a part of endless moments. Baby, without you, I am homeless.
Cool, so that's a little preview for you guys. I'm going to go ahead and turn everything on the master chain off because we're getting some snaps and pops in there. Usually when I get to the end of a track like this, the CPU is running pretty high. You can see even just sitting there, it's around 60%. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. And then I'll just kind of walk my way down. We'll get to the master in a little bit. But so we're not hearing the mastered version right now, so it's going to sound a little dull. But that's all right for the purpose of just walking through it. So let's just start with the verse here. I'll just work my way down. Usually the first thing I have is my kick bus up here. And I usually have that because at the top, just because I sidechain a lot of things to it. So it's just, I don't know, it's just habit to have it at the top. So in the verse here, we've got like a single.
I wish I didn't know you so well, we would be much better. I wouldn't read your face like I read your letters.
So that is literally just, I think, a cymatics kick with nothing on it. I try not to use cymatic samples too often, but once in a while, I do use them in most tracks, just like at least one or two of them. But the kicks I find are usually like very processed, almost too processed sometimes already. So that didn't really need too much. But that's the verse kick. Didn't layer any kicks or anything like that. And then in a similar kind of vein, I have in the drop, I have a heavier kick going on here that is a Cashmere, kind of one of the Cashmere classic signature kicks. A little more aggressive, punchier, and a little more high end to it. So that, and then let's see, I didn't process that at all either. It was another like highly processed kick. That being said, though, I think I have a limiter on the bus here, on the kick bus. And then I've got this Waves plugin, which is an SSL channel strip with a kick setting that I think I have like coming on. Yeah, there's a few. Okay, so in the verse, I like the way it sounded on the cymatics kick, but not on the Cashmere kick. So that's with, and here's without. So it's kind of just, that's with. It's brightening it up a little bit. This preset I usually find is a little too aggressive, so I end up turning down some of the EQ boost and stuff that it comes set with. But that's pretty much it for the kick. And then I put a limiter on there for somehow. Maybe it was clipping a little bit. I don't know. That's pretty much it for the kicks in this song. There's this other one here, but it's just a different sample, I think, that I liked in this build part here. Sit pretty straightforward. Let's see what we got going on with the snares here. So in the verse, let's listen to the snare bus. kind of unusual kick sound for me, but let's see what we got going on. We've got this rim shot. We've got this sound. We've got this sound once in a while. And then this sound is part of that group. And one thing I found is that if you're layering samples like this for a snare or something like that, it's kind of nice to bring in some automation or a different layer like every other hit. So it's not just the same thing over and over. You're getting a little bit of contrast. The other thing I did was I automated this. I have this Valhalla shimmer, which is a huge reverb. And I've got it, I think, coming in on like every other hit. So it's on that one. Actually, my bad. It's only on that first one in the transition. Create a little bit of a transitional effect there. So I've just got this turning on that one, and then I've got the dry wet set to about 35% and like kind of dying off before the next one, so it sounds natural. So I like to use kind of reverb automation like that in transitions. And then OTT kind of sounds good after reverb. It kind of brings it out a little more, especially in that like transitional part. And then I turn it off pretty quickly. I've got a glue compressor, which I'll use on the snare bus a lot with a relatively low attack setting. So you let the transients come through a little more. So I like to use kind of a slower attack on snares, so you let the initial transient come through. But it is compressing, I don't know, around 3 decibels. Got a little bit of makeup gain on there. And then I've got this plugin, which I've been using, which I'll talk a little bit more about. I have it on the master channel as well. It's called Soothe. If you haven't checked out this plugin, I'd highly recommend it. Basically what it does is it finds harsh frequencies like automatically and drops them out a little bit on its own, and you can set the depth or the sensitivity of it to do as much or as little as you want. And it really seems to do like a good job with finding those harsh frequencies. You see it's dropping certain frequencies in the higher end out a little bit, and it's a snare preset. So that's that. And then for some reason I have a gate on here. Maybe there was a part where it was coming through too much where I wanted to kind of get rid of the sound or something. That's pretty much it for the verse with the snare. Let's get to the drop here. So in the drop, all I have going is this. This is a layered. It's a few different snare samples layered that I created in a previous project, and I just pulled it in here and it didn't process it at all. But sounds like that. It's pretty bright. It's like a clap and a snare sound together. So that's what's going on in the drop with the snare. Let's get to some of the percussion here. Nothing going on in the beginning of the verse in terms of hi-hats.
I wish I didn't know you so well, we would be much better. I wouldn't read your face.
Got some hi-hats coming in here.
Letters. Pray to
So these are 3 different layers here, and what I have is I use this kind of new plugin called Arcade, which is a contact library basically from Output, and it has a lot of interesting percussive sounds. I really like to use it like in place of hi-hats. So it just basically gives you like a loop of something that I flattened down. So this was initially sounding like this. There was too much low end in it, so I cut that out. And then I've got a little auto pan, like literally doing what auto pan is supposed to do, which is just pan it left and right a little bit on each, like on a quarter note, pans left and right, just a little bit. The next layer looks like some kind of crane hi-hat loop. Cut out the low end, and I've put a kickstart plugin on there, so it's kind of doing a sidechain compression type of thing where it's on each quarter note, it's compressing down. And then to get things wider, sometimes I use this plugin by Soundtoids called Little Micro Shift, and it's literally like a stereo widening plugin. And this is the miniature version of it. So it's just a simple dry wet button, and then there's 3 different styles you can choose from. But I've got it set to about 50%, so it's widening that sound a little more. And then this third layer here is that kind of conga sound. I'm widening that up again with this plugin, just on a different setting and a little bit less wet, and cutting out the low end. And this probably came from Arcade as well. It's probably like a conga loop from the Arcade plugin. So if you layer these together, you get a pretty cool. So definitely experiment with weird percussive loops instead of just like an 808 kind of hi-hat or something like that. Just try out different, like layering a conga beat, like give it a high pass or and layer that with a hi-hat. And just try out weird percussive sounds. I think it just like makes the song sound more unique. Let's see what's going on. We got a lot going on in the build, so let's see what's going on there. Let me solo this. Cool, so there's a few layers here. The first one looks like it was like a pre-made kind of snare build. Kind of marching band sound. And that was already pre-made. I think it came from an Akali sample pack. Layered that with this. Just some hits. That particular snare sound has a little bit of this Lexicon vintage plate reverb plugin, just with a low mix. And this is just this plugin just sounds awesome on drums. So I'd recommend checking that out. For some reason, I've got an SSL channel strip again on here with probably a snare setting, a snare preset, I would imagine. And then this other build here, which might have come from an Akali sample pack again. And then, like, all together, they just sound like this. And that rising effect you're hearing is coming from this plugin called Endless Smile, which I like to use on drum buses a lot for builds. And it basically, all the reverb and like frequency automation you're hearing is coming from this plugin as I sort of automate the intensity up here. So yeah, and it's important to just, if you're going to do that, make sure you cut it off before the drop comes in, so there's no like it doesn't carry over into the drop, that reverb sound. Using Ableton's drum bus here, which I don't know if I'm a huge fan of it. In my experience, it seems to change the sound of your drums too much, but if you set it with not a full dry wet setting, a little bit of drive and crunch, just to kind of increase the transients and add a little saturation to it. Cut out the super low end. I've got this. I like to use this as basically a glue compressor. You could get the same effect with Ableton's glue compressor, which is just kind of it's kind of a bus compressor. So that's just doing a tiny bit of taming the dynamics. And I've got the Soothe plugin on here again. So this is right when I bought Soothe, so I used it a lot in the song. But I was just kind of experimenting with that, which gets rid of those harsh frequencies. And then let's see what's going on in the drop here. All right, so this is a percussive loop I took from another song that I created a while back. Actually, from the last remix we made. So unfortunately, I can't go into too much detail with that, but I've got that. I've got a crash right when the drop comes in for some kind of intensity. And then I've got this sound that comes in, which is just some shakers on a drum rack, and like this tabla sound. And what else? There's this fill here in the drop. And that sounds something like this. That took me a while to make, I think, actually. But it's basically this tom fill. And then with this sound after it, kind of just kind of a fill. Brah. And let's see. I think that's just that. That was already a sample. So yeah, so that's in there. We got this coming in right before that drop. That's pretty much it for the drop. I've got a crash like every 4 bars or so. And then, yeah, I think that fill took me a little while to make. I probably came from a number of different sample packs, but don't underestimate the time that it takes to make drum fills, because I've found that it just takes me a while, and the more time you put into it, the better it actually sounds. So that probably took me a while to make, but that's pretty much it, I think, for the drums in this song. In this transition, there's another crash. Pretty straightforward. Okay, let's jump into this next group, which is probably the main group in the song with all the synthesizers and everything. So what I like to do lately, mostly just to take it easy on the CPU, is use a big bus or a kind of a big group, a group in Ableton, where I put my sidechain compressors on it, and then put everything under that. So you're literally only using like 2 sidechain compressors in this whole group, and that way you don't have to drop them onto every track. So it's going to save CPU. The other thing that's good about this is you can't flatten an individual track. You can't freeze and flatten it if it has a sidechain compressor on it because of the routing. So if you put the sidechain compressors on a group instead of the individual tracks, you can still flatten those tracks. So that's just kind of a trick I picked up. Let's see what is going on with the sidechain compressors. I'm gonna go to the drop here. So obviously this is the kick one here. This is the snare one. I've got the ratio set really high because I like to use a lot of sidechain compression, and the threshold pretty low as well. So we're getting a fair bit of gain reduction on the drum and snare hits. And then the other thing I do a lot is I'll subtly sidechain compress a big group like this to the vocals. That's this one here. Pray to myself, I'll reverse the problems. So it's not doing a ton. I've heard that you should use a high knee if you're going to use this kind of sidechain compression. So I've increased the knee. And then, yeah, it's probably, 5 decibels of gain reduction or something like that. And that's just going to clear up some space for the vocals in the track. So especially with those higher frequency pads and synth sounds, it's just going to clear up a little bit of space in the mix for the vocals. This next group here is my kind of effects bus. And again, it's within that sidechain compressed group. So I've got a number of risers and things like that in here. And then what is this? Some nice little impacts there. Those sparkles. But I won't burn out on my head. And then in the build, got this riser. And these are just some reverse cymbals that I like to use a lot. I use the reverse cymbal trick a lot for transitions. Maybe I use it a little too much, but it just kind of is my go-to. And And then nothing going on that effects bus. And I honestly don't think I did a whole lot of processing on any of these sounds. What would be important is if you're using reverb on some of these sounds to make sure that the reverb is kind of not coming in. Make sure you use a lot of automation so the reverb's not coming in parts you don't want it to, or that it's cutting off right at the end of the sound. So it's not carrying over, and that's going to give you a cleaner mix. Something I would definitely suggest doing. Let's get down to some of the synths here. I've got this next bus, which is I'm calling it the Arps bus. Let's see what's going on in here, if anything here. So this is a Serum sound.
I wish I didn't know.
Looks like it's not coming in till later. So this is a Serum preset. If you want to take a look at that, it looks like I was going for like a Louis the Child kind of like a synth saw pad sound, but I put the arpeggiator, Abram's MIDI arpeggiator in front of it, and then a kickstart so that it's doing this bouncy thing. Cutting out the low end. One trick I learned a while back is if you want to really make sure you cut out low end underneath a certain frequency, use the EQ3 in Ableton instead of the EQ8. Apparently the EQ8 will let in a little bit more, whereas the EQ3, if you kill the gain, it'll actually cut it off at this level to ensure you're really not getting any low end. So try the EQ3 if you're just going to cut out low end on something like that. Then I've layered that sound with this other kind of ARP sound that has a little higher frequencies in it, I think. Yeah. So I flattened that, but it's probably again with Ableton's arpeggiator, and it looks like a Serum patch. And that's pretty much it there. Looks like that, whatever that is not doing anything. So those are kind of the ARPs. Let's get down to the synths and pads here. See what's going on here. This is in the verse. So the first thing I've got is a piano, which I'm sure I made in a contact library called Alicia's Keys, which is just a nice sounding piano. And that probably had a kickstart on it, so we're getting that really sidechain compressed sound. Then I've got this sound, which I came from the last remix I made for the Wheat Thin remix. And it's this bouncing kind of vocal pad sound. And that's using Outputs plugin called Exhale, which I like to use primarily for pads, which is kind of a vocal sampler type of thing where you make pads out of vocals. On this preset, Tight Slaps. And so, doing a little bit of EQing, really small amount of OTT, and then the bouncing sound is coming from this auto pan, and the way you can achieve that is basically drop an auto pan. Where are we here? Yeah, drop an auto pan in. And the last time I did this in the last tutorial video, I realized that I was doing this kind of wrong. So, but what you do is turn the amount up, the phase all the way down. What I did in the last video is I put this up to like 180 or 220 or something like that to get it to come in at the bottom of the LFO. But someone on YouTube, I forget your name, but thanks for the tip on this. All you need to do is click invert. So you invert the LFO and it comes in at the bottom of the LFO, which will give it kind of a more natural sidechain sound. And then I've got it on eighth notes. So that's what this is doing here. So definitely play around the auto pan and then like kickstart, sidechain compression just to make room for other noises in the track. Got another EQ where I'm dipping out some of the lows and increasing, kind of giving it a boost up here in the higher frequencies. And then, okay, I used, this probably was unnecessary, but I tried to widen it up a little bit using Ozone's Imager plugin. So I'm widening up the bands, the frequencies in the upper band up here. And then it looks like I'm widening them all up to some extent. And then I'm just turning the lower frequencies, if there are any, into mono. So that's just widening up the sound some. It's another trick you could use for widening. The other thing I did here is this is pluck in the song that I thought was clashing with this sound. So I used a sidechain compressor and compressed this to that pluck sound.
I wish I didn't know you so well, we would be much better.
So if you're finding things are clashing, try sidechaining them to each other with like a low attack usually, especially in a pluck sound. So that's just going to clear space for that pluck to punch through a little more. And in terms of the plucks, I have those down here. On the pluck bus, I'm cutting everything below 120 hertz with an EQ3 again. I've got two pluck sounds here. This first one is a Serum preset that I've used with, there's no oscillator turned on. It's literally just that bell synth sound coming from the noise oscillator over here. Just kind of just get a nice pluck sound. I've used this simple delay trick to widen it. Which basically, if you want to do that, you can drop a simple delay on and hit sync on each of these channels, and then usually turn one down all the way and leave the other one somewhere around 20 milliseconds. And so what it'll do is take the left channel and the right channel and separate them in terms of time and milliseconds a little bit, and that will automatically make the sound wider stereo. I'm using a transient designer from Universal Audio here to make the transients come through a little bit. I've increased the attack on that. A little bit OTT and a little EQ here. The second pluck is just something in massive. Right, and so what I did with these is that first pluck has a lot of initial transient sound to it, whereas the second one has a slower attack. And so that second one comes in kind of slightly after the transient of the other one. So that's that first one. But then with this, it sounds a little warmer and a little more filled out. And so that is a pluck in massive that I made a long time ago. If you want to take a look at that, I won't go all the way through it, but yeah, that's pretty much the pluck sounds there. And then let's get to the drop for the whatever synths I have going on in the drop here.
But I won't burn out. Let me.
Okay, cool. So that sound in the drop that's kind of like a saw sound. So there's quite a bit going on here. I'll try and touch on it. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it looks like that's two sounds, one of which is coming from Serum that sounds like this. The other one's coming from Massive and sounds like this. So this seems to be getting more of the mids and the warmer end. This maybe more of the high frequencies. I've done some processing. I've got some OTT. I was playing with this sound a lot. Let's see. Got an EQ. What I I did with this EQ is basically just go through and sweep frequencies, looking for harsh frequencies. Here is probably a harsh one, so earmuffs. Didn't like that frequency, so I cut it out a little bit there. And then I've got a little OTT on that sound. Holy shit, there's a lot going on here. This is a plugin from Universal Audio called Fatso, which is basically a compressor and kind of warmth generator. So it's got this warmth setting here. If you're finding a sound needs a little more mid kind of warmth, you can use that plugin. And then saturation, whatever this is doing. I don't know what that's doing. Let's see. LFO tool is what's giving it that kind of bouncy sound in here. Camel Crush, a little more saturation. A little dimension expander on there to widen it up some. Holy cow. This is crazy. I've got a Pultec EQ on here where I'm most likely boosting the upper frequencies around 12K. I've got a glue compressor on there. Okay, that's pretty much it. I don't think I'm using this at all. The other there's a couple other interesting things I did here. One is I've automated the stereo width. So I was experimenting with this to make the sound as that initial long chord, to make it get wider as it progresses. So it starts kind of mono and then moves up from there. Going from narrow to wider, and I thought that would give it an interesting effect. And the other thing I've done is I've got this reverb back here called Little Plate by Sound Toys, which is like this big plate reverb. And I've got, you can hear that reverb being automated with, this is the reverb here. This is a whole bunch of reverb after it comes in. And then no reverb. And then the other thing I've done is, which I would suggest trying out, is automating an OTT after reverb to bring it out even more. So if you're gonna use a reverb, try automating an OTT to go up as you want more reverb in the sound, because it really brings out the brightness and the reverb and the kind of the shimmer. And so I've got the OTT, the amount on the OTT increasing as the sound, as the reverb progresses. So that's this automation line right here. And you can see that amount going up to really bring it out. And so those are a couple interesting things I did there. And then, oh, now it's out of tune. This, I have trouble with MIDI sometimes, keeping it in tune. That's pretty much all that is. I mean, these are pretty short notes here. These are 16th notes, those. And that's pretty much it. The only thing I did was I basically did another track with that same exact sound on it, because I wanted this reverb to be really intense here, but to have this sound kind of filtering in before it actually comes in here. So I've got, in this part, I've got that coming in. It's basically the same sound, but I think what I've done is just filter it in using Sound Toys Filter Freak plugin. It's filtering in. You can do that with Ableton's auto filter as well. So that's pretty much it for these sounds. And And if you have any more questions about that sound, because I didn't go into a ton of detail, let me know. But again, it's like I did a way, like, so much processing on there. I just think I had an idea of what I was trying to accomplish, and so I just went with whatever I could do to accomplish that sound. And but I will say it's kind of rare that I'll do that much processing on a sound, like that much. It's probably a little bit excessive. And then I'm a little lazy too. Like, I try things out and then turn them off, but leave them on the track. So whatever. What else is going on here? We have this horn sound, which came from another track I made. And that's just got some saturation on it. I think that's pretty much it for the synths in the song. So let's get to the bass, which I also have in this master kind of sidechain group here. So the bass in the verse, let's see.
I wish I didn't know you so.
Got this funky bass here, which is coming from Diva. It's some kind of preset in Diva. Let's see, where are you? Here it is. And one thing I like to do with these kinds of, if you're going to use like a funky bass sound or even a bass guitar sound, is to cut out some of the low end and then layer the same MIDI notes with a sub bass, which I have underneath it to fill it in, because I didn't like the low end in this sound on its own. Got a transient designer increasing the attack to bring out the transients a little bit. This decapacitator plugin, which is basically a saturation plugin. You could do the same thing with Ableton Saturator. And then a sidechain compressor to the kick here, because I didn't feel like it was getting enough sidechain compression. And then with the sub bass, Ableton's hip hop sub bass, which I use a lot. I'm cutting out everything above where this sound occurs. So notice I have this low cut on this higher bass sound, and then this high cut on this lower bass sound, so they're not clashing too much with one another. So I've got the low end coming from this one only. And then that's pretty much that for that sound. I've increased the parameter, the distortion amount parameter that this plugin comes with to give it some saturation. Cool. And then in the drop, this is probably the build. So I've just got these longer notes in the build. And I've got this kind of Reese bass sound from Serum here, which is just a preset. I don't know where I got it from, but it looks like that. And again, I'm using the decapacitator plugin for some saturation and cutting out the low end so it doesn't conflict with the sub bass. But I love these Reese bass sounds. It's a wide sound. It gives you that buzz in the side, and so you really hear it come in this part.
Relax outside, but I won't burn out on my hands. I'm kneeling.
That's part. So try layering basses as well, as long as you're not clashing them in terms of frequencies. And then in the drop, I've got some 808 basses. Some layered sounds here. The first of which is just this 808 from a Ramazoid pack. And I'm using Universal Audio's little, it's called Voice of God, the VOG plugin, which kind of boosts amplitudes in the bass frequencies to intensify the sound. And I've EQ'd a little bit of boost around 70 or 80 hertz here to get the sub to come out even more. The other thing that definitely try on sub basses is pitch automation. So you can hear the sound go down there and go up here and then back down. So that's how you get that sort of, you hear that in hip hop songs a lot, that the 808 bass being pitch modulated. So if you go into the sound and click this E and make sure you're on transposition modulation, you can draw in that. So it's doing those things. And then in this one, it's just going down. And then the other thing I pretty much always do with 808 basses is create a buzz that you can layer on top of it. So this is made in massive with like just a single saw wave on a single oscillator, and I cut out any low end from it, and then tried to. Also, what I did is try to match the pitch modulation to the bass above it, so they're not off from one another. So that's gonna make the sub bass or the 808 bass stick out more in speakers that aren't as nice or don't have as much low end. So yeah, I'd suggest layering a buzz sound on top of a 808 to get it to come out more. And I always find that I need more of that than I think. This is that same buzz sound, just pitched up an octave, or the transpose using Complex or Complex Pro mode on the warp function there. So I've got those three sounds making up the 808 bass. I really want those to come through. Probably would want those to come out even more, but that's the best I could do on these. So that's it for the bass in the song. There's not too much else going on in this track. There's guitars. There's some guitars throughout in the drop here. These are just these guitar riffs that I recorded. And then over here. The way in which I've processed those is I have Waves CLA guitar plugin on there, which is set to kind of a basic preset where I'm increasing the high end and dropping out some of the lows, and then using the spreader to make the sound really wide. I like my guitars to be pretty wide. And then I've got an 1176 style compressor on here. Which is probably set to a guitar preset. And then I find with these Waves plugins, these CLA plugins, they let in, when the sound is not being played, they let in like a subtle buzz, like at all times. And so that's why I use a gate, just to kill it. I don't know if you can hear that, but there's a little bit of a buzz just to kill the sound when it's not being played. So when you get to the end of mixing your track before you master it, if you just turn your headset or your speakers all the way up when there's nothing playing, just make sure there's no buzz coming through. And then if there is, try to locate it. And so that's pretty much it for the guitar. I've got a synth from the stems in the original song that I chopped up a little bit here. This is from the original song. And I've cut out the low end in that sound. So there's bass in that originally, so I cut it out. And then I've got a kickstart sidechain compressor style thing on there, and then a filter delay, which I'm probably using just to give the sound, to spread the sound out a little bit, and to give it, this is just a little bit of like literally delay going on in that sound. I just thought it made it sound interesting. And so definitely when you do a remix like this, if you get a full thing of stems, don't necessarily just use the vocals. I usually make an effort to just use the vocals, but then incorporate at least one sound from the original song to kind of artistically emulate that original song a little bit, or take a little bit more from it. So you can hear that here. So that sound. And I only have that, it's not playing in the verse, but in the intro, and then in this part, in the transition. It's playing there too. And then I've got the vocals from the original track here. The vocals, when I got them, they were super dry.
I wish I didn't know you so well, we would be much better. I wouldn't read your face like I read your
And so I thought they were a
letters.
little, I mean, I don't mind vocals being really dry like that, but I thought they were a little bit too dry. So what I did is I created this group here with a few different chains with effects on them. So I like to do this on vocals a lot. So what I do here is I have one chain that is just the sound on its own, set to 0 dB, like as it is. So that's the clean sound of the vocals.
I wish I didn't know
And
you
then
so
this chain
well,
is
we
a
would.
reverb. I've got a vocal plate reverb on there. And make sure if you do this trick that you set the reverb to 100% so you're not getting any of the original sound on it, to make sure you're not getting any phasing issues. And then use the volume on that chain to determine how much reverb you want in there. And then what I've done on this, which is a great trick to use on vocals, is to put a sidechain compressor after the reverb and then compress that back onto the vocals themselves. So that's sidechain compressed to this track itself. And what that'll do is there will be less reverb when the person's actually singing, but in between notes, it'll let the reverb through some. So watch how this compressor, compressing the reverb, and then kind of letting it through between notes. So it's a great trick to make your vocals sound up front, but still have those nice reverb effects on there. This other chain is basically doing the same thing with a different kind of reverb. It's just a hall reverb. So this is that bigger reverb sound. And then again with the sidechain compressor trick there. And then I've got an EQ on here, which is dipping out some of the low end and boosting the highs a little bit. And then a compressor. This is a slow, like an LA2A style compressor that is a slow, subtle compressor.
I wish I didn't know you so well, we would be much better.
But a lot of time when you get remix packs like this, the vocals are going to be just fine as you get them. I've got this sound that I created by taking like the first note of, basically take the first note of a vocal. You guys have probably seen this before, but do it anyways. So take the first syllable. And then drop a really big reverb onto it. Like this. With like full wet, decay time up a little bit maybe. So you've got that. Then create another track, an audio track. Turn that to resampling and then record that sound onto this track. Capture the whole sound. And then go into, I'm going to delete that one now that we don't need it, and I'm going to go into that new track and click into the clip and then hit rev to reverse it. It's going to give you kind of a riser sound. Sounds like this. And what I like about that is that it gives you a sense that vocals are coming. So that's what I did with this, something like that. And so that's gonna just build some tension. You can use those as risers or whatever. And then the last thing I've got on the track are some vocal chops that, let's see what's going on with these. Not exactly sure, to be honest. Right, so I've got this sound, which actually probably took from just a sample right before that transition to build some tension. You can hear that. And then just like some little vocal chops throughout. Nothing crazy. I'm not sure what this is. Little vocal chop. Some textures. On that bus I have some EQ cutting out the low end. I like vocal chops to be wide as well, so I'll use Soundtoys Microshift plugin again to widen the sound. Some reverb, OTT, saturation, and delay. Quite a bit of OTT. And then I did some like mimicking with the vocals. So after a phrase, like a phrase here, he says feeling or something, I've chopped those and pitched them up. Pitch them up on this one using Little Altar Boy by Soundtoys. And then I pitched this one down using the same plugin. Pitched it down an octave. And so that's just going to give it some unique kind of filling in, conceptual kind of filling in.
I would take control.
I think that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it for the song, guys. I've got a reverb and delay bus that I don't know if I'm using at all. But let's get to the master here. Here's how I mastered it. So I'm going to turn that on and hope that the CPU holds up. But the first thing I've done is done mid-side EQing with FabFilter's Pro Q. So I always cut the side frequencies out somewhere below 100 to 200 hertz. So there's no sides coming through in the low end. And I like to boost the stereo, the side sounds as well, a little bit in the higher end. And then I found that there was too much bass in general. So in the mono, in the mids, I dropped out the some of the low end in there. And then I've got, this is a great plugin for mastering from Universal Audio called Precision Maximizer, which is kind of like a saturation plugin. And I don't know if, let's see if we can hear the difference. Of course, now it's going to
I would take control of all these
Then I use Ozone to master most of my songs. Since I already had an EQ on there, I did not use this EQ. The multi-dynamics I did not play with too much.
I would take control of all the just
freaking out. You get the idea. I don't think I touch these very much. I usually do make sure that the attack is not too fast. I find that the low end usually on the default setting is going to be compressing some, but try making sure the attack's not too intense. Use this harmonic kind of exciter here, which a lot of people use. Just added some saturation in the upper frequencies up here. And the imager, I've just made sure that everything below 100 or so is in mono. And then the maximizer, which is the limiter in Ozone. Let's see if it'll play. So it's not a ton of limiting. But then I have another limiter on top of that one, the invisible limiter, which I really like. In general, I do like to use two limiters so that one is not working too hard. So we're probably getting another couple of dBs of gain reduction from this. And that Synth plugin, which is actually, I think, primarily kind of made for mastering, which finds those harsh frequencies and cuts them out automatically for you. So that's what's going on here. I don't know. Cool. So that's pretty much the track, guys. If you have any more questions specifically about this, I tried to get through things as quickly as I could, but if you have any more specific questions, just let me know. I'll put the link to this remix in the description below. And make sure to check out our other tutorial on how we won an Atlantic Records remix contest for Wheat Thin as well, if you're interested in that. That's at our page, our YouTube page. So check us out at soundcloud.com/philomusic and let me know if you have any more questions, and I'll talk to you guys soon. See ya.